Let's do a review today of Lesson 4, Slavery in the Colonies. So let's start off with the northern slaves. These slaves were a little bit luckier than the ones that lived in the southern colonies. Not that anyone who was a slave was considered lucky, but the northern slaves had more opportunity to improve their lives. So let's go through some of what you learned yesterday. Most of the northern slaves worked in towns. They helped out in people's homes, they worked in stores, they worked on the waterfront. These slaves were able to improve their lives. Some of them could earn money by getting extra jobs. They could help out in the evenings by working in stores, by helping unload ships, and they could keep that money. And then that money could be saved to buy their freedom. That was a big deal for them. Now, these slaves weren't allowed to travel on their own or to go out of town or to go on ships unless they had written permission from their owners. So the northern slaves were able to improve their lives by earning money, and some were able to buy their freedom. Very different from what we're going to hear about in the South. The Southern slaves, on the other hand, most of them did not work in cities or homes, but they worked on large plantations that were growing cash crops such as tobacco, rice, and indigo. These slaves were treated horribly. They worked long hours. They were up before the sun and they worked until the sun went down. They were forced to do very hard work. They struggled to keep their families together. At many times, the families were split up and sold to other plantations, and they never saw their parents or their siblings again. It was horrible to be a slave in the South. They also struggled to keep their culture alive. They wanted to remember what their life was like in Africa, and they tried to use their home language as often as they could and share their artwork and to share their music. But some of the plantation owners wouldn't even allow them to play their drums or to sing their songs because they thought they were using some kind of secret messages that they could pass along between each other. So the Southern slaves had a horrible life. Now, there was some things that they could do to fight against being a slave, but not much. In order to get even with their plantation owners, many slaves would work very slowly in the fields. They weren't going to try hard if they were going to be a slave. They would walk slowly, move slowly, and do their chores slowly. Others would pretend to be sick when they weren't really sick. There were good people in the South, though, and these people would try and help the slaves to escape. And we call that the Underground Railroad. These people would help the slaves to get to the north if they could. If you remember the story, Follow the Drinking Gourd, they would follow the North Star to find where north was. So these people, once a slave escaped, they would work together to help that slave find their way to the north so that they could become free. Now, a couple of things that you read about in this chapter was something called the Stono Rebellion. This was the name of a place, the Stono River. And here was one of the few times that slaves fought back. A group of slaves actually fought with their owners near the Stono River in South Carolina. They planned ahead of time what they were going to do, and they were able to kill 25 whites before the slaves were caught. Unfortunately, when the slaves were caught, they were all lined up and executed. So they tried, but with not much success. So, in conclusion, we all know that slavery is wrong. And it wasn't until the Civil War when the people in the North really worked hard and won the Civil War to allow the slaves in the South to become free. And why do we study all of this about slavery? It's so that we don't make the same mistakes as our ancestors did, so that we never let people become slaves again.